So it's the newest version of the David 67 Celtic News YouTube channel weekly stream. Sorry for the wee bit of a late start. I was watching Scotland managing to come back to win 3-1, having looked like they were going to get beaten by Greece at home. It was kind of like watching Celtic in the first half. Virtually every pass going backwards, every pass going sidewards, getting the ball up to the halfway line and then kicking the ball back to the defenders. It was all in all a rather dispiriting, poor performance by Scotland for 60 minutes. And hello to Pat McLaughlin. Nice for you to join me. Nice few more people joining. Yep. I still am always skeptical that Scotland will mess it up one way or another. It's we virtually always seem to find a way of getting victory or success away from by blowing it at the last minute. So in theory, if we beat Scotland beats Belarus at the weekend, and then and Denmark beat Greece at the weekend, that would put Scotland guaranteed into second place at the very worst, which would get us a playoff place. Yes, you'd have thought we beat Belarus quite comfortably over in Hungary, I think it was. We played them with them being banned from having home matches, and then obviously they got beaten 6-0 by Denmark today. So they probably aren't going to come to play against Scotland with a lot of hope. But I can certainly see Scotland one way or another messing it up, and they are going to be a couple of players down due to suspension. And looked also that Aaron Hickey, the fullback, is out, which means Anthony Ralston's likely to start on Sunday against Belarus. And also one or two worries with Andy Robertson, the Scotland captain, which means maybe Kieran Tierney might start for Scotland at left back on Sunday. So at least they're playing on a Sunday, which means they have got the rest of the week. And it is a home game, so they will have a day or so off, and then they'll be back into training with Celtic properly on I guess Tuesday or Wednesday. Well, the one theory would be if Scotland beat Belarus and then Denmark and Greece draw, it does put Scotland ahead of the group, which means in theory if they beat Denmark at Hampden Park in the next set of fixtures, that would put them through as the league leaders. Certainly Greece have got it all to play for because they have to win on Sunday, otherwise they're out. Well, yes. So it is something I was planning to talk about today with this evening's live stream about whether Celtic should, what we thought is whether Celtic should play Sinisalo. Sinisalo actually played for Finland today. They beat, I think, Lithuania. They certainly won their qualifier. And he started for Finland. So it would be quite good for Scotland, certainly, if Kasper Schmeichel made the same sort of mistake as he did in the cup final the last time he played at Hampden Park, gifting that goal to Aberdeen that got them back into the Finland won 2-1. I think it was Lithuania they were playing, and certainly Sinisalo started the game, which is he's not been starting quite so many games for them recently, so good for them to Yeah. Okay. Yep. Hi to you, Gary and Cheryl Simpson as well. Not doing too bad at all. Got a wee bit of a cold at the moment, but it's getting better, thankfully, at last. I echo an awful lot of what you're saying there. I think honestly that I don't think we necessarily have to keep on Hearts' coattails. I think they're going to, much like Aberdeen, in the next month or so, they're going to start. They'll just like Aberdeen had a tremendous start last season, being unbeaten. They came to Celtic Park and drew 2-2, and then once they lost to us in the League Cup semi-final 6-0, their season went down and down and down and down. So I think Hearts' season is liable to start going down. Just when you start to get injuries and suspensions and fixture pile-ups and stuff, then I think Hearts are going to start to crumble. Theoretically, Hearts do have some money to spend in the winter window. I just think they'll like Celtic have an awful lot of bother trying to attract anybody to come and play in Scottish football. At least Celtic have the likelihood of every season being in some form of European football. Hearts have been kind of in and out of European football. I don't honestly see Hearts having the ability or the prestige to attract anybody of real quality. They might get lucky and sign a few players from less fashionable leagues who really turn on the style, which is always a possibility. But I don't really see Hearts as being a long-term threat to Celtic over the course of the season. I think we've got a much deeper squad. We've got much more quality as long as the players play to their best. Typically, when Celtic start a game against anybody, we've got 7, 8, 9, 10 internationals, 2 or 3 internationals on the bench. And although Cal McGregor's retired from international football, he's still good enough to play for Scotland. Yes, Pat McLaughlin, I think certainly if we go into the game against Hearts, which is in a couple of weekends' time, ideally don't lose, get a draw or get a win. I think that keeps us where we need to be. And I think, say, week by week over the course of the rest of the season, particularly when we get into the winter with the poorer weather, 2 games a week, the busy New Year and Christmas schedule. And I wasn't aware of what Hearts' next game is, but Hearts against Kilmarnock, always going to be a good game. Kilmarnock are a team who obviously are right up there, top 4 or 5 at the moment. They've started well, very well managed. Hearts have played well this season, and they've pulled out a lot of games in the last few minutes. I think they've had 3 games where they've scored added time winners. So I think Hearts are playing well. I don't think they've got a tremendous amount of quality as such. Don't think they've got an awful lot of difference makers, but I think they're a very well coached side. I think they've got a lot of talent on the side, but I don't think they've got any real star players. I've got absolutely no doubt. I've got absolutely no knowledge of whether the story's true or not. I really just always find it very, very hard to accept and believe stories where it's anonymous sources and it's all very vague and there's no real concrete details to anything. It sounded like a story made up by a newspaper journalist and his editor. The particular newspaper isn't a newspaper that's got a terribly good record of always telling the truth. If there are any Liverpool fans who also are Celtic fans, like I am, their behaviour over the Hillsborough disaster, tragedy, was really, really, really reprehensible. So I don't have an awful lot of faith in many journalists, and don't have really any faith in the journalists of that newspaper. It sounded like a story put together to create disharmony in Celtic, to create more stories, create follow-ups. I don't know. I honestly got no idea. Reportedly, it was investigated internally, and it was found not to be a story with any truth to it. It was all just rumours and accusations and stuff, and absolutely no evidence to back it up. So I don't know. It sounded to me like a story that was created to sell more newspapers and sell more clicks on their website. Having read the minutes of the meeting on Monday, it really comes down to whether you accept that the executives and the board and a football club does have quite a lot of other obligations in terms of running themselves as a business. There are a lot of business laws and financial laws and stock market laws that do stop you being open about transfers and wages and contracts and negotiations and stuff. There were quite a lot of things where clearly the fan groups who weren't happy with the answers they got. It sounded like there's the offer of more meetings. It sounded like they weren't very happy about the independent police report, or the independent inquiry into the police behaviour for the Rangers Celtic match last season. It looks like Celtic are trying to organise fan people to go along with the club to the meeting with the police later on. So, look, to me, it really comes down to what your angle on it is. Very, very clear. All the fan groups were very, very negative. Did sound also like quite a number of the fan groups were unhappy with other members of the fan groups for leaking stories and creating controversy before the agreed minutes were agreed and released by the two different sides. So my personal opinion, and it's my personal opinion, everyone can have their own opinion, that I think it's counterproductive. It's actually continuing this antagonism and against the board, trying to get them to answer questions which they may not be legally allowed to or able to answer. It is running a football club nowadays is very, very complicated. Running a football club that's successful on the stock market, it's a very, very popular share to purchase. I just happened by accident to be checking financial reports at the weekend. Well, there certainly seem to be different versions of how people thought the meeting went. Some of the people who were at the meeting were unhappy because other people released details about it when they shouldn't have released details about it until it was all agreed on. Just a wee second. Is it? I don't think when Celtic choose to replace Brendan Rodgers after the end of May-June, assuming that he leaves. Again, we're getting contrasting stories. A lot of people who claim to be Celtic insiders and know the truth have said that there's a contract on the table for Rodgers, and he's simply just refusing to negotiate or respond to the offer of the contract. Rodgers says something different in the press. With regards who they might appoint, I think Celtic will have lots and lots of different options. I think some of it might depend on who's available in terms of having lost their international jobs. There'll be a few managers possibly moving on from English Premiership jobs, maybe some jobs in Europe. A lot of people previous week were talking about Damien Duff as having taken a time out of football. I honestly think that Celtic will be as ambitious as they can be and getting a new manager in the summer. If one thinks about when we got, Eddie Howe was apparently just on the verge of signing for Celtic to be the manager, replacing Neil Lennon and John Kennedy in the COVID year. He pulled out at the last minute. We got Ange Postecoglou, and I think the great majority of Celtic fans thought that Ange Postecoglou was going to be another Ronnie Dahlia, and he very much wasn't another Ronnie Dahlia. He was an absolutely brilliant manager for Celtic. 5 trophies out of 6 in his time at Celtic. My personal feeling is, had he stayed at Celtic, he would have got better and better and better, and Celtic would have got better and better and better. Hi to you, Paul Maguire, as well. Hi to everybody. It's nice for people to be. I could certainly see Sean Maloney as being somebody's assistant manager, and I think Celtic probably, assuming that Rodgers does go in the summer, probably they should get rid of half to 2/3 of the current coaching staff. I think it's always a good idea to keep maybe 1 or 2 people from the coaching staff for continuity and stuff. But I think what Celtic needs at the moment are new voices. And I think it's quite clear from a lot of the vibes I'm reading is that there's a lot of sort of stagnation and staleness, and the players are bored with the way that Rodgers is setting them out. I think the players are very frustrated that they're not getting to be as aggressive as they want to. I could certainly see Sean Maloney as being somebody's assistant manager. I think he's a good assistant manager. He had a very good record as assistant manager for Roberto Martinez, the ex-Motherwell player who is Belgian manager. So I could honestly see Sean Maloney stepping up. Some people did talk about Roberto Martinez as being a possibility of being a Celtic manager. I've got no idea what Martinez is doing at the moment in terms of what job he's doing. I think from what someone said previously, Roberto Martinez is married to a Scottish woman, so he has got a lot of ties to, obviously, the Glasgow Lanarkshire area. So I honestly don't see Kennedy and Maloney as being as a 1-2. I can't see John Kennedy becoming manager and Sean Maloney being his assistant, or I can't see it vice versa. I think John Kennedy probably would be a decent person to keep going as a coach at Celtic for continuity, but I don't see him getting promoted. But certainly, I don't see in the long run Brendan Rodgers committing his. I think if Brendan Rodgers was going to commit his future to Celtic, he would have committed his future to Celtic June, July, August this summer. I think it's very clear that if the stories are true, and Dermot Desmond and Nicholson and Mackay and so on offered him a new contract, and he said he didn't want to negotiate at that point. I think it's quite clear that he wasn't really planning on staying at Celtic in the longer term. So just thought we could start off with having a wee chat about the Motherwell game at the weekend. Obviously, it wasn't a great performance. Their passing stats were a wee bit better than they have been before. They did get the ball forward a wee bit better than before, but they didn't look terribly dangerous in and around the Motherwell box. However, having said that, we did get 3 goals, so that can't be sniffed at. We had a lot more possession, a lot more pressure on Motherwell when we actually look at the stats. We got a wee bit of luck. We got a wee bit of luck with the Motherwell goalkeeper and defenders getting in a mix up. However, Benjamin Negrin was brought on. He did make a difference to the side. Kieran Tierney, I think, actually came on and made a difference as well down his side. Balaquisha showed one or two nice touches, and it was a really good cross by him. Yes, I can fully see where you're coming from. I can fully accept that. Watching Celtic isn't much fun, which is why there have been plenty of Celtic managers and Celtic teams where maybe we haven't been that successful, but we were playing a good brand of football. We were clearly trying as hard as we could. We were trying to be attacking, trying to play at our best. We may not have been quite so successful. There were one or two different reasons why Rangers and Dundee United and Aberdeen had more success in the 80s and 90s than we did. Rangers carried it on by spending far too much money and bankrupting themselves. But at least for quite a lot of that time, Celtic were playing nice attacking football. We had the Paolo Di Canios and the Pierre Van Hooijdonks and the Georgie Cadettis and Shunsuke Nakamura a wee bit later on. So were some great times being a Celtic supporter. Certainly completely agree with you, Green for Go. Yep. I think Celtic have gone backwards, not forwards this season. Some of the form and some of the way that we're playing is so reminiscent of spells in Rodgers' first season, in his second spell as manager. We had quite a number of games where we were playing poor football. We lost to Kilmarnock in the League Cup. Then we later lost to Kilmarnock at Kilmarnock on a horrible day. Then we lost to Hearts straight after that. We then had a spell early in the next year where we drew with Aberdeen. That was a pretty awful match. Then we lost to Hearts 2-0. And then that did seem to get Celtic kick-started. But totally agree. I wouldn't think I would if I was going to turn on a game of football just to watch two teams playing football. There are not been terribly many Celtic games that I would have enjoyed as a complete neutral. The Rangers Celtic match was one of the worst games of football I'd ever seen. The two Kirat Almaty games were absolutely terrible as football games. There was very little quality in either of the Almaty games, very little quality in the Rangers game by either side. So completely agree. Brendan Rodgers' football at the moment is boring. I think an awful lot of Celtic's poor performance comes from his management, his coaching, his setup, and as I've said before, his third season at Liverpool leading into his fourth season at Liverpool and his third season at Leicester leading into his fourth season at Leicester were similar sorts of seasons, not very successful on the pitch, a team that was starting to fall apart, transfers and loans and transfer windows that weren't terribly good, and at both Leicester and at Liverpool in season 4 he got himself sacked. Which is why I never thought he was going to stay at Celtic longer than 3 months. Scott Brown, certainly a lot of folk have been talking about Scott Brown as being an option to come in to be a Celtic manager. And again, I wondered about whether he might be Scott Brown might be more of an assistant manager. I'm not quite sure who would be a good manager for him to kind of learn under. Ange Postecoglou would be a very obvious person for him to learn under, but I don't. Even though I think Ange Postecoglou will probably be out of work at the end of the season, if not sooner, because I don't see the Nottingham Forest chairman keeping him going if his results don't improve. I think there's a possibility that because Rodgers isn't committing his future to Celtic. So if the stories are true that Nicholson, Mackay, and Desmond and Lawwell went to Spain to see Rodgers in the summer, they played golf, they had a few days together, and a contract was discussed, and he turned it down, or he said, "I don't want to talk about it yet." One can certainly see you wouldn't want to commit fully to his transfer plans if in 9 months' time or whatever there's going to be a brand new manager. So if Celtic do know that Rodgers is definitely leaving, hopefully, much like the transfer window in January, they're already making plans about long-term plans, long-term management options, long-term transfers and stuff. So I do think possibly that might be a factor with why the transfer window wasn't as good as hoped. I think there's an awful lot of reasons, some of which it would appear for legal reasons and business confidentiality reasons they can't go into. As I say, there were a lot of stories. A lot of stories regarding there being 2 or 3 players who were lined up to come to Celtic, but only were going to come if Celtic got into the Champions League. So there were thought to be 2 or 3 people planning to come in to be Celtic players if we were in the Champions League, and that all fell apart. So they then didn't come. Yes. I actually did a video. I did a video about this maybe about a year, 18 months ago, looking at Rodgers' transfer windows with Celtic, Liverpool, and Leicester, and the fact that he spent a heck of a lot of money at Liverpool, heck of a lot of money at Leicester, quite a lot of money at Celtic, quite a number of loan signings at Celtic as well, and very, very few of them you would give an A grade as in terms of a real high quality signing. It didn't seem to work terribly well with directors at football, particularly at Liverpool. That is something apparently the fan groups were very keen for Celtic to bring in. I think the Paul Tidsdale person's a sort of director of football. But I'm not terribly sure quite what Paul Tidsdale actually is doing for Celtic at the moment. But he does seem to be very much involved with Brendan Rodgers in terms of scouting, recruitment, player analysis. He seems to be very involved with analysing tactics and formations. Not that we ever seem to actually change our tactics on our formations. Yes, it is. That's a very good point, actually. You very rarely ever see Brendan Rodgers, if ever, actually at a football match. You quite often see lots of other football managers in the crowd, in the stands or whatever, in the directors' boxes, watching other teams playing. I guess Brendan Rodgers just watches everything on television, which is one way of following football. I certainly find quite often if I've watched a game live at the ground and then come back and watch all the game as live on Sky or BBC or whatever, it's actually quite interesting how different the game is. How different the game is when you're actually watching it at the ground. Obviously, you can see the whole ground. Often at football, you just kind of see the ball and where the ball is, and just kind of focused on that. Yep, I would echo that echo that sentiment. We got a bit of luck against Motherwell at the weekend. Took us to a win. We're keeping ourselves in the battle. Scott Sinclair was certainly a good signing first time around. Scored a good number of goals for us. And I think certainly in terms of his signings, the signings at Celtic first time around got, I thought, worse and worse with each season. The last season was particularly poor. There was a number of players who never played for Celtic but were brought in that Rodgers last year. There were 2 American players whose name I've forgotten. There was a player called Daniel Arzani, who was sort of an Australian but also Iranian or something. Great to have you on, Lauren. Yes. I think Celtic do need to add players in the January transfer window for definite. But I think actually the players should be more lined up to be coming to their best in time for the July Champions League qualifiers. I think this season, for one reason or another, both on the pitch with Rodgers and the coaching staff, and the players and the transfer, recruitment, scouting people, I think they weren't prepared in terms of getting the players in on day one of the pre-season training. But also there were so many of Celtic's players who weren't there on day one of the pre-season training. A lot of players were given an extra 2, 3, 4 weeks off. The 2 Japanese players, Maeda and Hitati, both got an extra couple of weeks back home in Japan. There were 1 or 2 players like Alistair Johnson, who was playing throughout the summer. And so fair enough, he got a bit of a break at the end, but there were a lot of players who could have come back early to, like McGregor came back early, McCowan came back early. I think actually Kieran Tierney came in pretty much straight away as well. But there were several players who played in pre-season, end of season friendlies for their countries, who then took an extra couple of weeks off or were given an extra couple of weeks off. And I think Celtic actually were underprepared on the pitch and off the pitch. So I personally would see Celtic maybe bringing in players in January more to have them 100% settled into the team, the training, the teammates, the country, the culture, etc., ready for them having a series of Champions League qualifiers in July. Yep. Dembele was good. Edward, as he came on loan from Paris Saint-Germain. Again, not so convinced that was a Rodgers signing as such, but we had some good players. We had some good players in those days. I'm not doing too bad, thank you, Monty. It's a wee bit of a cold over the course of the last week, but it's now going away. Thank you. Yes, I think Rodgers has this reputation for being a great person for developing players. I think he's a good player for developing players if that player fits his a square peg in a square hole. I think it fits Rodgers' stubborn 4-3-3, wide players, etc. Rodgers, for me, tries to change too many players to fit his system rather than adapting the system to fit the players. I'm not convinced that the way he's using Nygren's terribly in favour of how Nygren plays. I don't think it's really suiting Balikwisha the way that he's being asked to play. Dyson Maida's being kind of played here, there and everywhere. I think the system works well for Kelechi and Acho, which is why, despite the fact hadn't played terribly much, he's actually fitted in quite well. Although I thought he was actually a bit disappointing on Sunday against Motherwell, in that he rarely ever got himself into the box. He had a couple of half chances, he had one shot. But to be fair to him, he did score the penalty kick, which was the most important thing. But I was a bit disappointed with Ian Acho's ability to get himself into the danger zone, to do good runs, to create space for others. It was one of the bonuses we had with Kyogo. Even when he wasn't scoring a lot of goals, he often made a lot of good runs to create space for the wide players, the midfielders, players like Maeda or Kuhn or O'Reilly a wee bit before that to run into. So yes, it's a wee bit similar to the theory about if you got a thousand monkeys with typewriters, that they will write the works of Shakespeare or the works of Dickens or whatever. So the theory is, if you do sign 50 players, that some of them are going to be half decent, in that you actually are signing players who have been professionals at other clubs. I'm not convinced that, and I think Rodgers is quite as good at using players that are already part of the system, and he's good at using players who fit his system. I don't think he's very good at players who don't really fit his system. Don't think he's very good at adapting his way of tactics. If you look at how successful, Luis Palma has been moving from Celtic to play for Lech Poznan in Poland. He has been one of the players of the year so far in Polish football. He's been moved to playing a much more central attacking midfield, second striker option. Something that Rodgers would never do in a million years would be to use a player like that in a different position. For Rodgers, Palma was a winger and only a winger. Whilst I think possibly Benjamin Negrin's probably going to be at his best in a more attacking midfield, sort of free role, to go right, to go left, to go into the box. It was kind of a wee bit of the way he played in the second half against Livingston, a much more of a free role. Well, I think in terms of the summer transfer window, I think it's always a wee bit premature to judge them early. I think I think Nigrin for the greater part has started well. I think Tunieki has started very, very well. Ian Acho's been a surprise in that he hadn't played terribly much football at the highest level for about 6 months, and he's come in and done a decent job. He scored 3 goals, which is pretty decent, all things considered. I think Yamada is unlucky. I think if he was given a proper chance to establish himself, I think he actually would be a very useful player for us coming off the bench. A player with pace, a player who can score goals, a player who can create goals, can play out wide. So I think Yamada, for one reason or another, doesn't seem to be in Rodgers' good books. The mystery of what's happening with Jamai Simpson Puzzi keeps on going. He doesn't seem to be anywhere near getting into the first team. Yang's a very frustrating player, and I think again Yang is a wee bit similar to quite a lot of people. I think he's been changed and adapted to fit the Rodgers system. So he actually is a player with quite a lot of pace, but he is trying to sort of replicate the Maeda role by sort of tracking back and helping out in midfield. Yang's at his best when he's got more of a free role to get into the box and score goals. He scored, I think, 6 goals and 6 assists last season. Patrick Roberts is another player that Rodgers liked a lot. We had him for a couple of seasons on loan. His career after he left Celtic to go back to Man City kind of went down and down. He, of course, I think went from Sunderland to Birmingham in place of Yang going to Birmingham. So I think Yang's a pretty decent player, but he clearly is a player that's at his best coming off the bench. He's not a player that Celtic could reliably rely on to start games. James Forrest, for one reason or another, for this season, to me, is one of Celtic's most disappointing players. He is right up there with Callum McGregor and Rio Tati as being very disappointing. Yes, that was a point I was going to make when I was when Lauren was talking about the January transfer window. Kuhn scored, I think, 3 goals in the second, when he joined us in the January. He scored 3 goals between signing for us in mid-January and the end of the season with the cup final. And then in his real only season with Celtic, he really took off. Played very, very well. Lots of goals, lots of assists, lots of very good creative play. But he took 2 or 3 months to settle down. Took 2 or 3 months to get his fitness up, to get used to Scottish football, to get used to the conditions, the tactics, the teammates and stuff. Which is why I think Celtic have to have an eye on the Champions League qualifiers in June and July and August, and also plan their pre-season so that all the players are back in on day one rather than coming back in dribs and drabs. It was interesting. I didn't fully understand the story, but it was kind of implying that Maeda has said he maybe isn't looking to get away from the club in January, and that they'll look at it again in the summer. It's one of these things, obviously, when he gives an interview, the interview is given to the Japanese press in Japan, because he's back playing for Japan in a couple of international friendlies over this 10 days. But any interviews he gives are always in Japanese, obviously, so there's always a wee bit of translation difficulties. But it sort of looked like he was saying that he's maybe not looking to get away from Celtic in the winter, that he resigned himself to staying. He's going to knuckle down. He's going to make the best of a bad lot, etc. I have it's something I have said quite often, is that Rodgers far too often tries to put square pegs into round holes and round pegs into square holes. I do wonder what Rodgers would have done with a player like Lubomir Moravcik or Shinsuke Nakamura, or a player like Paolo Di Canio, a player that's more sort of magical, a bit more of a player who's in and out of games, but a player who could win you a game with this one piece of magic. Some of my favourite players were Moravcik and Shinsuke Nakamura, but I really do wonder whether Rodgers would have tried to change them and change their brilliance and their idiosyncrasies and their magic, and try and fit them into it was in the old days of old-fashioned typewriters that the theory was you put 1,000 monkeys with 1,000 old-fashioned typewriters, and then they could write you a masterpiece. So yes, I thought it looked to me that Maeda was quite committed. It looked like he took a lot of pleasure in scoring the goal. After all, he has actually scored 3 goals for Celtic this season. So he's scored 3, Iheanacho's scored 3, Nygren's scored 4. So actually, he's equal second top scorer for the club this season. So that's not too bad. And he did participate in the post-match man of the match interviews as well, which he doesn't always do. Yes, so I do wonder whether maybe whether the Celtic players over the months since the transfer window have been chatting with Dazin Maida, maybe he and his wife and kids have kind of settled down to being back in Glasgow. Reportedly, he's been made very good friendships with Inamura and Yamada. Maybe they've kind of helped him settle back into Scotland. I don't know. He certainly seemed a bit more like himself, particularly at the end of the game against Motherwell at the weekend. Yes, I agree. Hatate has been a shadow of himself. I can think of all the games so far for Celtic this season, I don't actually think he's actually had a game where he's played well. He's had some games where he's played very poorly, some games where he's been at best average, but quite a few other Celtic players have had good games. I don't think Hatate's ever been more than like a 6 out of 10 or a 6.5 out of 10. Some of the other players have had a sort of higher ratings than that, but Hatate is actually a big miss for us this season. The question is whether Hatate is still struggling with the injury that affected him at the end of last season. As I say, he had about a month or so of his summer holidays where he was rehabbing with physio and gym and stuff in Japan, and then he had about a month of getting himself back to fitness in Japan before he came back to Celtic. So he was quite late coming back to Celtic to join pre-season training. Whether he just has been slow to get going, I don't know. But Hatate is a big worry. Of course, there were stories that Hatate was also going to be going in the summer transfer window. I think because he had been injured in May and June, clubs were reluctant to try and buy him in July and August because they weren't sure about how well he was going to come back from his injury. So I don't know whether that's a factor with why Hatate's not been himself. Yes, and it's something I was having a wee discussion with somebody through the comment section. The thing is, actually, if Hatate and Maeda both went away in the January transfer window, they're going to have to play really well in October, November, December to attract anybody to come in and buy them in January. So in a lot of ways for Celtic, them playing well is obviously good for Celtic, but it might actually get one or two transfer offers to come in for them. Yes, I think I'm not so. A lot of folk have felt that Dyson Murray was sulking, and I think he's actually quite a reserved person. I don't personally think he wasn't trying. I think he was trying his hardest. I just think in that he was running all over the pitch. He was getting himself into good positions. Just particularly in the two Kira Almaty games, he missed the chances that he would have scored last season. He missed them in the two Almaty games late on. I personally, I would be all for giving Rio Hatate a couple of weeks away from first team football. Maybe have him on the bench. Maybe give him a week or two, a week away to recharge his batteries, get himself mentally right again. Or if he has got a wee grumbling fitness issue, which is a possibility, get that fully settled. Because he did have I think a game off with injury, then he came back. One of the other worries is for me is the fact that our three backup midfielders, McCown, Paulo Bernardo, and Arne Engels, none of them are playing particularly well either, which means that there are quite a lot of different. We are a wee bit short of options to replace McGregor and Hatate. I think Hatate is a super player. When he came in along with Maeda at the start of the second half of Ange Postecoglou's first season, he made a real difference. He and Maeda were a real boost towards Celtic winning the title, coming from behind at Christmas and New Year. He's played some really, really good games for Celtic. Missed quite a bit of time out through injury one season, and he had a really, really good season last season. But he's been really quite poor this season, whether it's injury, whether it's he's unhappy, whether it's just he's out of form, like anybody can be out of form. Yes, it was one of the odd things that Rodgers seemed very, very fixated on the fact that Maeda could really only play left side or through the middle, but players like Jota and Maeda and Forrest and Balakwisha and Chinyeke, they actually are all very, and Negrin for that matter, are all very adaptable players. They can play right side, left side, through the middle. But I think Jota could do a really good job for us down the right-hand side when he comes back from injury. I think Maeda is actually maybe better down the right-hand side than the left-hand side in that he's right-footed, which means he can actually use his pace to hit the byline and get the ball in for Iheanacho and the midfielders and Tuniek coming in off the other wing. His delivery with his left foot is very poor on the left side. He's always cutting in on his right foot on the left side. So I'm very happy for him to be on the right side, as long as Chinyeki keeps on performing well down the other side. Yes, it's entirely possible that it does sound like he had an expectation that he was going to go, and then it all fell apart. I think Celtic had no other option but to keep him under the circumstances. Possibly, if Kuhn had stayed and Jota was fit, then I think Celtic probably could have let Maeda go. But under the circumstances, I don't think Celtic could have ever afforded Maeda to go. And I do think, actually, as I said at the time, I think Maeda will come good. I think the game against Motherwell, he was starting to show some good green shoots of recovery. I thought he was very adaptable. He played down the right hand side for about 60 minutes, then he swapped to the left side for a bit, and then he went in centrally when they took off Iheanacho. And then he made a really good run to get that front post diving header from the Balakwisha cross. So I think he may have turned the corner. Yes, so and with Tati definitely a top quality player, but this season, well, that may be the case, but it's very, very premature to be planning to leave the country and so on until the deal's actually done. So, so I have every sympathy for him. He's got a wife. He's got 3 kids. It may be they're all decided they were going to leave, but he is under contract with Celtic for another couple of seasons. He's one of Celtic's highest paid players. He is contracted to Celtic, so he is obliged to play for Celtic. And if Celtic say you're staying, he's staying. So his contract has got, I think, 2 years to run. He's had a couple of upgrades to his contract to Celtic. So Celtic have rewarded him very, very well by stepping up his contract on a really regular basis. He's now one of the top 5 earners. I think at Celtic. We'll find out next April when the financial figures come out, just what the hierarchy is for the wages. But I can certainly see that it would be unsettling if you are thinking you're going to be moving to Germany or England or wherever he was supposed to be going. That it is disappointing if that all falls through. I dare say that a lot of us who've got real jobs in the real world, there have been times where we may have been getting a promotion or a new job, and then it's fallen through at the last minute. So, in essence, Brent Dyson-Maida applied for another job, thought he was going to get the job, made some plans about changing his house and stuff, and then that job offer fell through, which has happened, I'm sure, to a lot of us. Yes, I from his scouting videos and his highlight reels for his time with Antwerp. He's a player with a lot of ability, a lot of talent. As I say, he did get an injury and seemed to struggle to come back from that. He spent most of last season out injured. Played a few games, got injured, missed about 3 or 4 months, came back, played a game or two, got injured again. And he was just getting himself back into playing for Antwerp this season. So hopefully he's a player who's going to settle down. I think he's a player who can play in a number of different roles for us. Right side, left side. He can play attacking midfield. He can even play as an emergency striker. So I think he's a player that if we use him properly, or if Rodgers uses him properly, could be a very adaptable player for us, a very useful player for us. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of us have had a similar situation. We thought we were going to get a promotion, or we thought we were going to get a move in terms of our job, or etc., and it's all fallen through. Yes, of all the players in Celtic's team over the last 6 weeks or so, I think Colby Donovan has been one of our consistent players. He coped well coming on as a sub in Kazakhstan when Rolson got himself injured. I thought he played quite well. He got himself forward in that game. He, of course, got himself forward in the Kilmarnock match to help us win that penalty. He's defended very well. I think I like the fact he is that bit more big and bulky. He's a bit more of a player who's able to challenge for the ball in the air in both boxes. The story Rodgers was giving was that Donovan had played 5 games in in 2 weeks. Well, McGregor had played 5 games in 2 weeks as well. Donovan is a 19, 20-year-old young man who has no chronic injuries. Callum McGregor is a man who's, 32, 33, whatever he is at the moment, who's got a chronic Achilles tendon problem that he's had for 2 years that he has to sort of nurse from game to game to game. McGregor, for me, is a player that probably needs to have a game off every 2 or 3 weeks or something, just so that we can keep him for the bigger matches, the games in Europe, the Cup semi-final against Rangers in a month, well, that's a wee bit less than a month, 2 or 3 weeks' time. Yes, and what you're saying, Rodgers is McGregor's been inconsistent since January 2023. I think that kind of probably actually coincides with this Achilles tendonitis, Achilles minor tear that he's had ever since then. Apparently he's had several steroid injections and pain-killing injections into his Achilles tendon in his heel to let him play. Yes, so I think part of why McGregor's been maybe inconsistent or not been really at his best, he has had over those 2 and a bit years some very, very good games, I think. But he's also had some very poor games and some games where he's been kind of crowded out the game. I didn't think he was particularly good against Motherwell. What I really don't rate McGregor for, particularly in the last year or so, is the fact he's not a very vocal player on the pitch, neither Carter Vickers. They never seem to be going around and getting the teammates all sort of fired up. There didn't seem to be much reaction on the pitch when Celtic went 1-1 with Motherwell, or even when they went 2-1 down. There didn't seem to be anybody sort of clapping and shouting and going around and get everybody fired up. Rodgers certainly doesn't do that on the touchline, as far as I can see. Yeah. Yes, I think Kieran Tierney is probably a wee bit like Callum McGregor. I think Celtic are sort of nursing him back to full fitness. He did spend an awful lot of time in the last 3 years with Arsenal and out injured. Of course, he got himself injured playing for Scotland in the summer, and then he missed months and months and months and months. Hadn't played terrible amount of a lot of football in 2025. So I think Celtic were just coaxing him back to full fitness, and then he went off on an international break and had to pull out that with an injury. That put him back, I think, a week or so. I think the good thing is that Marcello Sirachi, I think, is proving to be a very, very good backup left back, to the point where I do wonder, although Rodgers isn't a manager who takes many risks or does anything out the box, but I do wonder maybe one option to try and improve Celtic's passing coming out of defence would be to move Kieran Tierney to left centre back, and then play Sirachi as the left back, have Carter Vickers and Tierney as the 2 centre backs, and then put Scales on the bench. I don't know. Just I think one of my thoughts is that Carter Vickers and Tierney are not Carter Vickers and Scales are not very reliable passers. Too many of their passes go backwards or sidewards. Too many moves get stuck and slowed down with the ball going back to them. And that when we do get the ball moving quickly out of defence to Carter Vickers, Scales, then to McGregor, Hatate out wide, Celtic can play well and play with pace, but too often the ball goes to Scales, it goes to Carter Vickers, and everything just slows down. And that was also the case, I thought, with McGregor at the weekend on Sunday, that things were slowing down when he got the ball. I think Celtic can certainly go. I think if Celtic's players are playing about 66%, 75% of their ability, they're more than good enough to go and beat Hearts at Tynecastle. At the moment, I think they're not really getting much above 50% in terms of playing to their ability. So there are some games where more than one where one or two players play well. I think we had a game against Motherwell where not terribly many Celtics players played well. My man of the match was Benjamin Nygren, and of course he came on with half an hour to go. I think someone was also talking about the fact you can set your watch by the fact that Rodgers will make a triple substitution, a double or triple substitution around about the 60th minute. Every game, it seems to be, we will bring on a midfielder or two, a wide player or two, and we never seem to actually really change the team, change the tactics, change the way that we're setting up. Just seems to be like for like replacements, and it always seems to be at the 60 minutes mark. I would agree with what your sentiments there, Monty. I think my personal feeling is that all this antagonism and protests and banners and nasty words going back and forward in the press and through social media and stuff, I think it's all counterproductive. I think it's affecting the fans. It's affecting other fans. I think it's affecting the players. I think it's affecting the morale of everybody within the Celtic club, both on and off the pitch, playing and non-playing staff. And my personal feeling is we should just get on with playing football and get on with supporting the team. Yep. Yes, Maeda is the man of the match. I liked his adaptability. I liked the fact that he started on the right, went to the left, played through the middle, scored the winning goal. As I said, I think he was getting back towards his better form. I thought. To be fair, there weren't terribly many other players I thought did well, apart from Nygren and Maeda. To a lesser extent, I thought Sirachi did a pretty good job, and then until he gave away the penalty. Yes. It certainly seems that their plans are to continue protesting, continue pressure to get the board sacked, to get the chief executive and the chief financial officer sacked. The decision to sack the board and sack the chief executive and the chief financial officer is to sack Nicholson and Mackay would be a decision being made by the board, by Dermot Desmond and so on, possibly with pressure from all the big investors and shareholders elsewhere, of which there are quite a lot of major shareholders who are not actually on the board because they've chosen not to be on the board. Yes, I would agree with you. I think it's counterproductive. I think it's making Celtic. I think the sooner it's resolved one way or the other, I think it's like having an argument with someone at work or an argument in someone in your family life. That quite often the thing to do is to thrash it out and then move on and then get on with working together and doing the best for your company, doing the best for your organisation, doing the best for your family, etc., etc. And the one of the goals appears to be sacking Nicholson, sacking Mackay, sacking Lowell, and forcing Desmond to sell his 34% shareholding. None of which I think will happen in a million years. And as I said, from a wee bit of information I got from a legal person, there are a lot of rules regarding finances, stocks and shares, contracts, human resources, etc., where where the Nicholsons and the Mackays are unable to release certain details because it potentially breaks financial laws and stocks and shares laws, and also breaks business rules and stuff as well. I think Chinecki is still a super duper player. I think what's happening is because Celtic aren't really showing an ability to have anybody else who's creative, I think teams are double teaming and triple teaming Chinecki. So against Braga, they had two people on him with often a third person coming across to stop him getting any progress. And I think Motherwell also did a very good job of keeping a fullback on him, but also having a midfielder dropping back to block him off as well. So I think because teams at the moment know that Chinecki is the player that's the creative player that might have a bit of magic, he's been kind of marked out the game. And so what really should happen is the Maidas, the Negrins, the Iannaccios, the Hattati, the McGregors, they should start taking up the space that's created by Chinecki having two people marking him or three people marking him. And that's not really happening. Happened a wee bit with Negrin getting a bit more space when he came on. Yes, I thought I was happy with Balikwisha. He seems to be slowly improving and getting used to it. Some people seem to move from club to club and cope very, very well. Some people take a good length of time to settle in. As somebody was saying a wee bit earlier on, that Nicholas Kuhn took the best part of 2 or 3 months to settle into Scottish football. He was just starting to get himself a bit more consistent and into better form at the end of the end of the season. After he joined us in the January, he was starting to improve, really get into the swing of things in the April and into the May, and then of course it was summer holidays time. Although I thought we would maybe have a look at is that about a week or so ago, I put a wee poll up onto the channel community section about who we wanted to be our goalkeeper for the next wee while, whether it's going to be Sinisalo or come on. Yes. So yes, a lot of people have been a bit disappointed in Kasper Schmeichel's performances this season. Very, very clearly against Braga, he was very much at fault for the first goal against Braga, although you could argue that the defence, the midfielders should have been shutting that space down, not letting that player get the shot off. Liam Scales could have come out closer to him to try and block the shot. He just kept on retreating to the edge of the box. So there's an argument to say that the midfielder should have done a better job closing him down. The defence should have pushed up to stop him getting the shot off. However, Schmeichel should have saved it. He clearly was at fault for the goal against Aberdeen in the cup final that lost us that game. He's made one or two good, decent saves this season. His distribution and passing's not been as good as it was previous season. So the results of the poll. This poll's actually still got a couple of days to go. I said I would keep it going until Sunday, but based on well over 100 votes, Sinisalo is leading by an absolute mile, 81% to 16 for Schmeichel and 2 for Doohan. I think in terms of Scottish goalkeepers, Ross Doohan's a perfectly good Scottish goalkeeper. He is, I think, Celtic's number 3. He was good enough to play international football just a few days ago. I'd say just a couple of months ago in the summer. Just thought it'd be interesting to have a wee look at some of the stats for Sinisalo and for Schmeichel. They actually are really, in most ways, pretty comparable. Sinisalo's 6'3", Schmeichel's 6'2". Obviously, Schmeichel is 15 years older. He will be 16. He's going to be 39 in November on Bonfire Day. Schmeichel's contract actually runs out in June of 2026. Sinisalo is signed up with Celtic for another 3 years after that, so he's going to be with us till 2029. So it does look like the long-term plan is going to be for Sinisalo to take over as Celtic's number 1. Sinisalo's played 10 games so far for Celtic. He's conceded 5 goals in those games, 5 clean sheets. And so pretty decent in terms of 50% clean sheets and half a goal per game conceded. And his save percentage over his Celtic career, 79%. Comparably, Schmeichel, 60 games for Celtic, 53 goals conceded with 31 clean sheets. So he's got a slightly better clean sheet record. 51.6 for his clean sheet record, and his save percentage is pretty much the same as Sinisalo's at 77%. So I think a lot of people certainly are going for Sinisalo to be Celtic's number 1. I would not be averse to Sinisalo becoming Celtic's number 1. I think he's a good shot stopper. I think he needs to improve a wee bit in terms of his command of the box and command of taking the ball at high balls and corners and direct free kicks and so on into the box. His distribution is pretty good. I don't think he's quite as good as Kasper Schmeichel is when Kasper Schmeichel's at his best, but I think Kasper Schmeichel's performances so far in the 25-26 season have gone down a bit. Whether he's got a grumbling shoulder problem hanging over from from his injury in the spring of this year, I'm not sure. But he doesn't seem to be quite the same goalkeeper since the injury shoulder playing against Portugal for Denmark. Yes, I think particularly for players like Inamura and Yamada coming from Japan to Scotland, I think that's a massive culture shock, massive language barriers. Chinyeki seems to come from Swedish football and come straight into Scottish football and taking it to a duck to water. Obviously, Balakush has been a bit slower. Iheanacho had the benefit of having played in England for so long, so he's come straight back into our football and pretty much settled down completely. But I think it does take time for a new player to settle into a club. I'm still waiting for Brendan Rodgers to explain what is or isn't actually happening with Jemai Simpson-Puzzi. He looked a really talented young player playing for Man City last couple of seasons. He played a couple of Champions League matches. He played quite a few Carabao Cup matches for them. And quite why Simpson Puzzi's not playing for Celtic, hasn't played a game for Celtic. He's been on the bench but never got anywhere near being on the pitch. And certainly over the last couple of weeks or so, Simpson Puzzi, Yamada and Inamura, none of them have been on the bench. Quite how they're, or actually the same for Callum Osmond, quite how their careers are going to progress at Celtic, I don't know. If all they're doing is training at Lennoxtown and then sitting in the stands to watch, or sitting at home to watch the players playing on a Saturday or a Sunday or a Wednesday or a Thursday. So it's. I wasn't aware that Petrov that happened to him. It makes a lot of sense, and I think certainly very quickly learning the language and settling into the culture is very, very important. A lot of the players who've done very well, like British players going to play abroad, are the ones who've actually done really well, are the ones who've very quickly adapted to learn the language and learn the culture. Someone like Gary Lineker did very, very well moving from England to play in Spain. Quite a number of players who have gone from British football to European football. It's the ones who've actually settled down, learned the language, learned the culture, adapted to Italian life or French life or German life or whatever, are the ones who actually do very well. Quite a lot of them, like Ian Rush, came back very quickly. Paul Gascoigne came back very quickly because they couldn't learn the language and they couldn't settle down in a foreign country. And so my thoughts with Daizen Maeda certainly still seems to use a translator all the time. My feeling is that he understands English very well, but he's not confident in speaking it. And certainly I know from having taken foreign holidays in the past, that it's a lot. I find it a lot easier understanding what the person's saying to me in the shop or the restaurant or at the train station or the airport or whatever. But actually having the mental ability to translate what I was thinking in English and saying it in French or Italian or whatever is a difficult thing. So I think his ability to understand English is very good, but he's not very confident about speaking the language. And he probably should be. And that's the interesting thing is I think Inamura is actually a lot, is his ability to speak in English is better than any of the other Japanese players. So I do think teaching get players learning the native language is very, very important. I think it's really good for teamwork, really good for training, tactics, etc. And I do feel that Maeda and Hatate, etc., should really be showing much more ability to speak in English, be it for press things or whatever. My guess is that his level of English is good enough, more than good enough, for players on the pitch to give him instructions, for Rodgers to give him instructions on the pitch. So I suspect that probably his ability to understand English is better than his ability to speak in English. I certainly don't. It certainly is in growing up on the east coast of Scotland. Certainly, but at university, I did go to university with quite a number of people who were native Gaelic speakers. I had three or four friends, three friends friends who came from the island of Lewis and Stornoway, and they were all native Gaelic speakers. So, and of course, if anybody follows the women's team, their games are covered on BBC Alba, which is all in Gaelic. But every now and again, the commentator breaks into English for people to understand what he's actually saying. So, and again, a couple of my daughter's friends, they also are native Gaelic speakers as well, and they learned it at the schools that they went to. As with everything, everybody's got the right to enjoy different things. I enjoy watching the women's team. It's been something that's brought me and my daughter together really well. She really enjoys watching the women's team, so we've gone to a few games. So I think it's a good thing, but it's not for everybody. So if you don't like women's football, don't watch women's football. It's not obligatory. But I enjoy it, and as I said, it's been something for me and my daughter to go to, have a nice day out, nice weekend out. We had the pleasure of going to watch the women's team win through the Champions League qualifiers last season. So that was two very good evenings watching them doing that. So yes, it's not, and I cover the women's team once a week on the main channel, but I flag it up as this is about the women's team, so don't watch it if you don't like the women's team. And there are a small bunch of supporters. Lauren, who was on earlier, she's a very keen supporter of the women's team. I am hoping to go to a couple of games over the next couple of weeks. But we'll get back to talking about the men's team. Fair enough. Yes, so as I was saying, it does look like the overwhelming majority of people are going for Sinisalo over Schmeichel. I think, unfortunately, Brendan Rodgers is not the kind of person who will change that. I think he is a Schmeichel fan. I think he and Schmeichel had a good relationship at Leicester. And I think Rodgers thinks it would be too much of a risk to drop Schmeichel and try play Sinisalo. As I said, I thought his yes, well, my daughter is a lot more single-minded, and and if I told her not to do something, she probably would do it just to go against what I wanted. So, but as I say, we've had some really good afternoons and evenings going to watch them. Yes, I think Sinisalo. He's also been playing international football for Finland. He's mostly been the number 2 goalkeeper for Finland. Has played, I think, maybe about 10 games for Finland, but obviously he's only 23 years old now. So he's clearly been playing international football at the full level for a couple of seasons now. He's played for quite a lot of different clubs, played a bit of time for Aston Villa in the lower levels, played some loan football with Exeter. I think he is a really good goalkeeper. I think he needs just a wee bit more experience, which is why I'd be all for him getting more and more games this season. Yep. Yes, so you're quite right, Finball. Sinisalo started for Finland in their 2-1 win in the World Cup qualifiers. He played one game in the last international break. He played one of the games and then was on the bench for the second one. He's, I think, probably for Finland, he's going to be much like he is for Celtic. He's going to probably be the backup this year. Then next year take over. Oops. Yes, 2%. Well, I didn't. I honestly didn't think many people would vote for Doon, but I thought it would be fair to give us the option to vote for him. I think actually, if Ross Doon came in to be Celtic's goalkeeper, I think he would do a pretty decent job. I think Ross Doon's a better goalkeeper than Scott Bain. I was always very, very nervous when Scott Bain played in place of Joe Hart when Joe Hart was either out injured or suspended, etc. I was never very confident with Scott Bain being in our goals. I'd be a lot more confident with Ross Doon in the goals, and I'd be very, very confident with Sinisalo in the goals. And my personal vote would be for Sinisalo to take over from Schmeichel sooner rather than later. As I said, it looks like Schmeichel's contract is finishing next June. Doesn't appear there's been any progress in terms of a new contract for him. I don't know whether he wants to stay another season at Celtic. He will be, as I say, 39 years old at the end of this season. Whether he's maybe going to decide, assuming that Denmark qualify for the World Cup, that he's going to retire from all football after the Summer World Cup in America. So, as I said, I'm perfectly happy. I would be perfectly happy if Ross Doon was our number 2 goalkeeper next season, with Sinisalo as our number 1 goalkeeper. I'd be very happy. I think Sinisalo needs a bit more experience. Whether that's another season being Schmeichel's understudy, I would prefer for Sinisalo to start playing more and more games. Maybe get all the League Cup games and all the Scottish Cup matches. And make the transition to him being the number 1 goalkeeper next season more and more easy. But Doon being our number 2, I think is a perfectly good option. I think Doon probably is a number 3 goalkeeper at the higher level rather than number 1 goalkeeper. He last season was played quite a number of games for Aberdeen when their goalkeeper Mitov was injured, but he dropped back to being the backup goalkeeper. And he's kind of been all over the place. He obviously started at Celtic, and then he went down south, and then he came back, played a couple of years at Aberdeen, and I think he's a perfectly decent goalkeeper. But for me, Sinisalo should be our number 1 sooner rather than later. My feeling is what Rodgers will do is when they come back from the international break, Schmeichel will be number 1, Sinisalo will be number 2, and I hope one way or another Schmeichel gets back to the really good form that he's had for Celtic for the last for Celtic for much of last season. He made a lot of big saves for us. He made a lot of big saves for us last year in the Champions League matches. He made several saves which won us the 3 points or kept us drawing the game. So I think he was a big factor last season in the Champions League, going as well as it did do. It's Coca-Cola I'm having. Um, um, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays are not days for alcohol. It's just Friday, Saturday, Sundays. So it's just Coca-Cola. Honestly, it's just Coca-Cola. Just talking and talking for the best part of 2 hours. My throat does get rather dry, so it's simply Coke Zero. So I was actually quite encouraged today in terms of both Anthony Ralston and Kieran Tierney. They came on to play for Scotland later on in the game, and I thought they both actually did pretty decently. Kieran Tierney seemed to be playing in a sort of a left-sided midfield role to start with, and then he sort of dropped back to play left centre back or left back when Scotland managed to bizarrely get a 2-1 lead and then defend it for the last 10 minutes or so and make it a 3-1 actually in the end. But so it was actually quite good. I thought Ralston actually did a pretty good job coming on in the right back position, defended well. He actually got forward to help create the first goal for Scotland this evening. So, and I suspect that Ralston will be starting for Scotland against Belarus on Sunday. And Tierney obviously might be starting for Scotland in the left back role because Robertson's been struggling with injury apparently. Yes. Yes, that was one of the things I was actually going to talk about. So thank you, Monty, for bringing that up. I think my own personal feeling is that we have actually, I think we've got quite a number of very good midfielders. Just at the moment, none of them are playing at all well. Nygren, when he's played as a conventional midfielder, doesn't seem to play terribly well as a conventional central midfielder. But when he has a more of a free role, which he definitely had against Livingston in the second half, he sort of had a free role at some of the spells in against Aberdeen, had a wee bit more of a free role against Motherwell on Sunday. He was able to get himself a lot more further forward. He nearly scored straight after coming on. He obviously scored the equaliser because you were pressing up right on the edge of the box. He seemed to have that bit more freedom to move about. I think if we were going on simply on talent and past performances, probably our best midfield would be Hatate, McGregor, and Nygren, with Nygren sort of playing in more of a free role attacking midfielder, a bit more like the way that Matt O'Reilly did, particularly in the 23-24 Brendan Rodgers season. And I think that might actually use Nygren's abilities to a better level than playing him as a conventional midfielder. But Rodgers seems extremely fixated on having a number 6 and 2 number 8s, to use the modern parlance of having McGregor playing that deeper role, the sort of a defensive midfielder, quarterback style role, just in front of the back four, pushing further into midfield. I think McGregor's actually best position is playing as a more sort of left-sided central midfielder, playing one slot up, as you would say. And so I do wonder if I was playing one of these Football Manager games on the computer, my personal feeling would be to play McGregor and Hatate as sort of box-to-box midfielders, playing Nygren in front of them as an attacking midfielder with more of a sort of a creative role, a role to get himself into the box, to drift out on the right, to drift out on the left, create overlaps and overloads and stuff. I think there also would be an argument to playing Dyson Maida is more of a free role central striker, second striker behind Iheanacho, kind of using Iheanacho as if he was Chris Sutton or John Hartson, with Maida playing the Larsson role, playing off of him. Again, you could then allow Maida to go out wide on the right, the left, from that more central position. But the main problem I think Celtic have got at the moment is, yes. So that my personal feeling was I think as Pat's saying, McGregor's best role probably is left-sided central midfield, but Rodgers especially has been desperate to play him in a much deeper role. I'm not convinced. Monty, keep on talking, keep on contributing. But yes, sorry, as Pat was saying, I think McGregor's actually at his best as a left centre midfield rather than playing as a defensive midfielder. Certainly when he was playing for Scotland, when he was playing for Scotland a couple of years ago, before that he was always much more of a left-sided central midfielder, didn't play the deeper role. So there's for me there's a definite argument for playing Engels in a deeper role, possibly even playing Paolo Bernardo in that deeper role. I think Engels actually could be a player who has that ability to play in front of the back four, move forward to central midfield, drift out wide, get on the edge of the box and shoot, etc. Again, I'm not convinced that Rodgers is using Engels at his best position. Certainly when Engels was playing in German football for Augsburg, he was much more of a player that played all over midfield. Rodgers likes putting him in one pigeonhole type thing, one position, and not really giving him the freedom to roam about the pitch. Yes, I have long said that Celtic should go for it. Could easily play a 3-5-2. If you did go with Carter Vickers, Trusty, and Scales, Trusty is a really good passer, coming out of defence. Having the extra defender might compensate for the fact that Scales isn't the quickest of defenders. Trusty sometimes does get himself caught out of position. But with Trusty, you at least would have a player who can really pass and get the ball forward. Johnson, I think, is a super player. Kieran Tierney is a super player. Another argument would be to put Kieran Tierney to left centre back, use Sirachi as a left wing back. McGregor, Engels, and Nygren. I would again. I think McGregor and Engels would work fine as box-to-box midfielders, pushing Nygren in front of them, and I think Iheanacho and Maida again good options. I think with your selection there, you would have Johnson and Tierney having the ability to get forward and give us width, hitting the byline, etc. You would then, they've both also got enough energy and pace to get themselves back to make a back five if required. Yes. I totally agree. So a game against Dundee, all right, actually even a game against Motherwell on Sunday, they played with one main striker, Stanopoulos, or what his name was, and a couple of players who were quite pacey going out wide. But we could easily have just had played with a back three, even against Kirat Almaty, particularly in the away leg. Again, they were not really getting the ball that far forward. We could easily have swapped a back three, both home and away against Kirat Almaty. But we have got fullbacks who can play as wing backs as such. Alistair Johnston, tremendously adaptable player. We could even play Alistair Johnston if we needed to as a right-sided centre-back, moving Carter Vickers to more central, and then Trusty or Scales or Tierney as the left centre-back. Johnston's quite often played as a right centre-back for Canada. He's played as as a defensive midfielder now and again for them. He's played a few games as a right midfield. My personal feeling is that a football team should be quite fluid and able to adapt and be in a basic 3-5-2 and then drop that back to be a 5-3-2 if we're needing to defend a lead, etc. It should be a one where the fullbacks can be as inverted fullbacks, they can play as wing backs, they can play further forward, they can drop back, they can cover for the centre backs, or the centre backs are going up for a corner or whatever. Should be much more fluid, and I think players like Nigrin, Maeda, Tunyeki, Balakwisha, they've also got such adaptability that they could play 2 or 3 roles up front. So you could have Tunyeki and Maeda drifting out wide, coming in to support Iheanacho up front. You could have Nigrin doing the same thing, coming in to be a third or a fourth player in the box. I think we've actually got a lot of players who are very, very adaptable. But for Rodgers, the only formation, the only way he plays is 4-3-3. Now, admittedly, we did swap sort of to having 3 centre backs, but no one seemed to be playing as the right fullback, the right wing back, the right inverted fullback, and we were constantly exposed down that side later in the game. This is my personal feeling. You may well be right, Paul. I think had Celtic qualified for the Champions League, a lot of the loss of confidence, the loss of team spirit, the loss of morale within the players wouldn't have happened. And also the toxicity, anger, bad atmosphere, protests, silence, etc. from the fans wouldn't have happened because we would have been in the Champions League. And if one believes the stories that a few football agents and football journalists were talking about, had Celtic beaten Kairat Almaty in that penalty shootout or beaten them on aggregate, there were supposedly 2 or 3 players lined up to come in the last few days of the transfer window because Celtic were guaranteed to be Champions League football. So my personal feeling is, had Celtic got through that game, that tie, as they should have done, because Maeda should have scored that goal at the Celtic Park. He should have scored that goal with 5 minutes to go in Kazakhstan. So we should have gone through at least 2-0. We should have beaten Kairat Almaty no matter who we were playing. Our players were more than good enough to win those games. My personal feeling is that we could well have, had we got into the Champions League, we would have stepped forward because our morale will be better, our spirit will be better, our confidence will be better, and the atmosphere on and off the pitch from the fans, the board, the players, the coaches, etc., would all be 50% better as well. So I think that had we qualified, we would have done decently in this year's Champions League. Partly because I think we would have then had another couple of players brought in because they would have agreed to come to Celtic because they were getting Champions League football. Oops. Well, my personal feeling is that Johnny Kenny is a good player. He needs more first-team experience. I think Shin Yamada is a very good player. He scored a ton of goals in Japanese football, not this season, but the season before. He got himself into the Japanese squad And getting into the Japanese squad as a striker is no mean feat, because they've got a lot of good qualities forwards. So basically, the Japanese manager thought he was a better bet than a few Japanese players playing in European football, thought he was a better bet than Kyogo. And as I said, he did score a good number of goals in the 24 season in Japanese football, and that's no mean feat as well. So if Rodgers cared to give Yamada a proper chance, now that he's settled in Scotland, I think he actually would turn out to be a good player. Yep. I think Yamada is. I'm more than happy to accept that Hayato Inamura is, in terms of professional football, is a relatively inexperienced player. 2.5 seasons in the Japanese league. He is 23 years old, so he is that bit more mature. He did have a successful university football career in Japan. University football in Japan is much higher level than it is in the United Kingdom. In that some of the university teams actually play like in the Japanese Cup and that kind of thing. And as you're saying there, also the record for the fastest player in Japanese football was Daisen Maeda previously, but Shin Yamada broke that record. And so I think Yamada is a player who I thought Yamada actually looked at quite a lot of times a player that had a lot of pace and a lot of good ideas. He came very close to scoring against Livingston. It just doesn't seem like Brendan Rodgers rates him or trusts him or likes him. And for that reason, I think he's going to be like far too many players at Celtic who get signed, come with a very good reputation, and hardly ever see the first team. I'm all for formations that are fluid and can transition from one thing to another. So all for a couple of midfielders dropping deeper, having a couple of midfielders who push you up more, go out wide. I think there's lots to be said for it. The diamond formation, the 4-1-3-1, and all these kind of things. Which I think Celtic should be much more adaptable. The problem is everybody knows that Rodgers plays a 4-3-3, so you set up to play a 4-3-3. You'd have thought that the fact that we most weeks have to contend with a low block system, that Rodgers would have worked out a better way to break down the low block. Different formations, having two players up front, so that the two centre backs or the three centre backs have got more than one person to mark. Get more and more players into the box. One of the great things about Ange Postecoglou's system was you virtually always had the central striker, but also the two wide players, be it Jota or Abada or Maeda or whoever it was, in the box as well, scoring goals. And we did do that a bit last season, obviously with Maeda and Kun scoring a lot of goals last season, with Ida having 20 goals and Kyogo 12 goals last season. So it looked like last season Rodgers was trying to get the wide players into the box to score goals. Someone was talking about Scott Sinclair earlier on. He's got a good number of goals for Celtic first time around. But it's certainly this season, Rodgers seems to have, he wants the wide players to stay wide. He wants the centre forward, which in this now is Iheanacho, to drop down deep, hold up the ball, spread it out wide, and then try and get the midfielders to come up and support the attack. But the midfielders, apart from Nigri, none of the midfielders really are coming up to support the attack. So too often there's one player in the box to receive a cross from the wide players. Dyson has got himself into the box a bit, coming out his wide role, but we've really lacked having players in the box, and we really should be getting 3, 4, 5, 6 players in the box on a really regular basis to have lots of options for passes and crosses, but also to have lots of options for rebounds and so on as well. Yes, so I think if we do get back, if we do get Jota back fit and well in the new year, I think he could be a very important player for us. I think when he came to us in the January window earlier this year, I don't think he was quite at his best. It just felt like he was starting to get back to his good form, and then unfortunately got himself injured and out for what's going to be 9 months, I think, as a minimum. And I would personally be quite surprised if he does come back to playing in January, but that's roughly apparently what Brendan Rodgers has talked about. Good news is that Alistair Johnston does look like he might be back in the first team squad when we come back from the international break prior to the Dundee match. Whether he's fit enough to be on the bench for the Dundee game, I don't know. Whether he's fit to be on the bench for the Sturm Graz game the following Thursday, I don't know. But it does look like from an interview he did today for Celtic TV that he's very close to being back into proper training and proper first team squad availability. And I think he actually will be a very important player for us, because he's one player who actually does get his teammates motivated. He is one player who's actually quite vocal on the pitch, and Celtic don't have actually very many players who are very vocal on the pitch at the moment. So another thing about Kasper Schmeichel is that last season he was a lot more noisy, a lot more directing his defenders to be in position, etc. A lot more encouraging for his team when the chips were down, etc. But this season he seems to be quieter. Whether he is a bit like Rodgers, winding down because he knows this is his last season for Celtic, I don't know. That's a very interesting comment, Sligo boy. I'm not because of the YouTube family friendly rules. I won't be able to put that up on the screen, but yes. A fit Callum McGregor. On form, Callum McGregor is a very, very important player for Celtic. When we've not had him in the past, be it because he's under par because of injury, or he's out injured, or he's lost his form, Celtic don't play nearly as well, which I think is why Celtic aren't playing anywhere near their best at the moment, is that he, for one reason or another, or 2 or 3 different reasons, isn't performing much above 50% capability. I think if we got McGregor fit and firing on all cylinders, I think Celtic would quite improve quite dramatically. Obviously, if we could get Hatate to step up his performance back to his levels of last season, again, I think Celtic would be an awful lot better. One of the problems that Celtic have got, as I was saying earlier on, is that none of Celtic's 5 conventional central midfielders are playing well this season. Paulo Bernardo, Luke McCowan, Arne Engels, they've come on as subs, made some starts, and none of them have really never really reached the levels that they should be at. Quite why Arne Engels seems to have taken a couple of steps back, I don't know. Paulo Bernardo doesn't seem to have ever really recaptured the form he had when he was here on loan, when he was with us on loan. Luke McCowan, I think, is a very dependable player. I think he's ideal for coming on the last 10, 15 minutes of a game. My feeling is when he started games for Celtic in the last few weeks, he just isn't good enough at the moment to be a Celtic starter. But certainly I think he's a player who can come on off the bench, produce a bit of energy, vitality, an odd nice pass or two, or the odd nice shot. And I think he is a player that we should be using coming off the bench. But I don't see him actually being good enough to be a Celtic starter. Yes, and as Pat is saying there, McGregor did score a good number of goals for Celtic last season, a good number of assists as well, and a lot of teams were marking him and double teaming him and stuff, which was giving more space for Engels and Hatate to play in. And again, much like I was saying, I thought with Chinieki now being double teamed and treble teamed by our opponents, other players should now be getting more space, and the ones who are getting more space just aren't using that to get themselves into the box or make a killer pass or killer cross. And that's another reason why Celtic aren't performing anywhere near their best. But as someone was saying a wee bit earlier on, the main thing is we're lying second in the table. We have a game against Dundee as our next league game. One would fully expect Celtic to beat Dundee on the Sunday 12 noon kickoff. Then we've got the Sturm Graz game, which is a home game in the Europa League, and then we've got the Hearts game the following weekend. I think even as we're playing at the moment, we're more than good enough to at least get a point of Hearts. If we play near our best, we'll beat Hearts. And Monty, you make a brilliant point. It's something that Celtic don't seem to have really been looking at, particularly in the 2 years so far with Rodgers having come back to be the Celtic manager. It really should be yes. I think it certainly should have been a priority in either the first summer transfer window or the second transfer window or the third transfer window under Brendan Rodgers to get in a Callum McGregor replacement. We were linked with quite a number of very talented young defensive midfielder, central midfielder type players, but none of them were pursued properly. And Lennon Miller obviously went off to Italian football. There were one or two other options we were looking at, but all of that fell apart. And for me, that it's something that Celtic should be really developing this season, especially, is who's going to take over from Callum McGregor, be it over the course of this season, be it over the course of next season. I just think with him having this Achilles tendon problem that doesn't seem to have ever properly gone away, that we really need to have somebody ready to replace him. Some people thought that Tomoki Iwata might have been that player. Rodgers kicked him out. He went down to Birmingham, was one of the key factors in Birmingham getting themselves promoted. He's having a decent season this year in the English Championship, which is actually a very high, really quite high level of football, and he's doing a pretty good job there. Kwon, the South Korean, another player who never really got a chance to play under Brendan Rodgers. He's apparently doing well in French football at the moment. Even a player like Bozen Lawal, who converted to being a defensive midfielder. He's now gone down to play for Stoke. And after a wee bit of a dodgy start last season for Stoke, he's actually starting to play very well for them this season. So we had quite a number of players in our squad that could have been Callum McGregor replacements. Well, my personal feeling is that the board are very, 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 very keen for us to be in the Champions League, because us not being in the Champions League this season is going to cost us an absolute fortune. So I don't really get where anybody is saying that the board are not ambitious. Certainly, we didn't have the signings that we expected that we were going to get. I think it's not being guaranteed a Champions League place was a big factor. My personal thing is the board want to be in the Champions League because they get so much more money. Getting so much more money also helps with things like sponsorship, merchandising, hospitality, obviously prize money for being in the Champions League, more TV money for being in the Champions League. In terms of the financial model, that extra 20-30 million pounds that you'll get for being in the Champions League is a big hole in Celtic's budget this season, particularly because they have committed big wage contract salaries to players like McGregor, Carter-Vickers, Jota, Maeda, Tierney. Obviously, we've got a 3 million plus contract every year for Brendan Rodgers, so they actually do have a very high wage budget. For a year or two, our wage budget was less than Rangers. It's now said to be considerably more than Rangers. So we actually are committed this season and next season to quite a number of big, very expensive player contracts. So being in the Champions League for them was very important. I don't think it was as simple as the board not sanctioning the purchase of players. I think part of it was players knew that Celtic have got money and that Celtic wanted players, and so they were doubling the price of a player. And so the curious thing was the season before we spent big money on Engels and Ida and Trusty and 4 million on Paulo Bernardo, and the feeling was that the fee we paid for Engels, for Trusty, and for Adam Ida was about double what they were actually worth. And then the board got criticised for spending too much money and spending twice as much as the player's worth. And it certainly feels that teams like Go Ahead Eagles and the team that was selling Sondre Orchetter, Sarpsborg, were asking for twice as much money as the player was worth. And so the question is, do you want Celtic spending 10 million on a £5 million player? Do you want Celtic spending £20 million, as it would have been or something like £20 million to sign Muntiano from Cluj, which was the asking price was something like 17 million with so many other additional fees on top of that? Was that what we want? Do we want Celtic to spend twice as much money? Because none of us would buy a car that's worth £20,000, if the asking price was £30,000. So if something's worth a certain amount of money, that's what you would pay for them. You wouldn't tend to pay double to buy a car. So I don't think you really should be paying double to buy Muntiano from Cluj, or paying double the price of Jacob Broom from Go Ahead Eagles. We spent probably over the odds to get Sebastian Chinecki, and that may well turn into a very, very good bit of business. We got a bargain, if you ask me, for Benjamin Nygren, just like we got a bargain when we signed Hatate and Maeda 3 years ago. Got a bargain, I think, when we got Alistair Johnston the following winter. So I don't think it's a lack of ambition on the board's part. I think it's the problem is Celtic are playing in Scotland. We're a low prestige league. Now that's because of the underperformance of all Scottish teams over the last few seasons. Our coefficient's gone down and down. We're not getting straight into the Champions League like we did for a couple of years. We're having to go through this season 1 qualifier. Next season, I guess it'll be 3 qualifiers to get into the Champions League. We'll be starting at the same kind of time as some of the other teams, like the champions of Denmark and Croatia and Serbia and stuff. So we'll be starting at the same sort of time as Copenhagen and so on. Had to come through an extra couple of rounds to get to that stage. Of course, Slovan Bratislava joined the season the round before we did. They got knocked out by Kairat Almaty. And so I think that was a large factor in our summer window not being as good as it should have been, that we didn't have the automatic Champions League spot to attract players to come to the club. And I don't think Scotland is. I think Scotland's becoming a less and less attractive place to come and play football. I think the overall quality of football in Scotland's not that good. I think all the problems that our big rivals across the city are having could potentially mean that Scottish football becomes worse and worse for a couple of seasons until they get themselves stabilised again. I kind of lost count of how many managers they've had over the course of this. So they've had 3 managers so far this season. You guess they'll have a caretaker manager, or at the very least they'll be using their 4th different manager in 2025. And although it's nice to see them not being successful in terms of Scottish coefficients in European competitions, Rangers being successful, Aberdeen being successful, Hibs being successful, etc., this season would really have boosted us in a year or so's time in the Champions League qualifiers. But next season, we're going to be probably down with 2-3 qualifiers to get into the final stage, assuming that we win. I would say Celtic actually did some very, very good business right at the very, very start of the transfer window. We got in Kieran Tierney. He came in right at the start of the transfer window. Benjamin Nygren came in very early in the transfer window. He was all part of the squad very, very early in the pre-season training. So I think we did some very good business right at the start of the transfer window. And for one reason or another, or probably lots of reasons, we did quite a lot of business at the end of the transfer window. All I would really say is it's strange that many of the same people who, under Ange Postecoglou, were able to get people in right at the start of a transfer window, now that Brendan Rodgers is the person who's in charge of the initial steps towards green-lighting players coming to the club, we seem to be really, really slow, with Brendan Rodgers being the kind of the manager of the team. Under Ange Postecoglou, with many of the same people who are from the scouting department, the recruitment department. We seem to be far slower under Rodgers as the manager than we were under Postecoglou as the manager, with quite a lot of staff still being the ones from the Postecoglou era. So that suggests possibly that Brendan Rodgers is a bit of a handbrake on doing business quickly. And according to the minutes of the meeting on Monday, Nicholson and Mackay said that Rodgers and Tisdale were the starting points towards which players came to the club. They were the ones who identified targets. They're the ones who greenlit targets. They're the ones that sent the scouting people out to do more and more scouting. Paul Tisdale apparently does a lot of extra scouting for Celtic, often being the final one that decides. And then they said that there's a kind of a committee type of thing where Rodgers and Tisdale and people from scouting and recruitment team all come together to work out how much a player is worth in terms of a transfer fee and a contract, etc. And so about half the people who were under Postecoglou are still at the club in the recruitment and scouting, etc. So maybe Rodgers isn't very good at coordinating that sort of thing. And as we were saying a wee bit earlier on, his performance with Celtic first time around, and with Liverpool and with Leicester, it was all rather poor in terms of transfer windows, with an awful lot of rotten signings, a few good signings at Liverpool, a few good signings at Celtic first time around, very, 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 very few very, very few good signings at Leicester. I think I agree with you, Pat. We could find 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 very, very good players. The question is whether any of them want to come and play in Scotland. As I said, a lot of players who in the olden days, i.e. about 5 years ago, came to Celtic or came to Scottish football as a stepping stone to a Big Five league. A lot of them are now going to Belgium, Holland, or to the English Championship. So quite a few of them these days are going to Greece and Turkey. So we did have a very good reputation for being a league to go to if you wanted to develop yourself into and then get into a big team in England or France, Italy, Germany, Spain, etc. But I think that's becoming less and less the thing, and other leagues have taken on that role of being the stepping stone leagues. Belgium, Holland, and as I say, the English Championship have all become a place you go to be a stepping stone. I think, to answer your question, Sligo, I think as the minutes of that meeting suggest, the people on the board, the executive board members, Mackay and Nicholson, said that they made mistakes. People underneath them made mistakes. I think it's a combination, like in any big organization, or in actually any situation. It doesn't tend to be one person who's at fault. So we go back to the Kasper Schmeichel mistake against Braga. If Paulo Bernardo, McGregor had closed down that midfielder from Braga earlier, stopped him getting a shot off, had Scales come forward to put pressure on him, he wouldn't have got the shot off, which meant that Schmeichel wouldn't have made his error. If we think about the goal against Aberdeen in the cup final, had we defended better the ball going out wide to Shayden Morris, had we defended the front post better, it wouldn't have got to Schmeichel for Schmeichel then to fumble the ball. The goal against first goal against Motherwell on Sunday, Ralston could have cleared the ball, then McCowan could have cleared the ball, McGregor could have cleared the ball. We could have pressurised the Motherwell player who moved it out wide. We could have closed down the wide player for Motherwell. Scales and Carter Vickers both left Stanopoulos unmarked. He then got in between the two of them. He beat McGregor. He beat Scales. He beat Carter Vickers. He got to the ball first and he scored the goal. So basically, there's about 5 people have not done their job as well as they could have done, and that's caused Celtic to lose those goals. I think it's very much the same as the transfer window. It's a combination of lots and lots of people not doing their job as well as they could. And rather than being one person to blame, I think it's lots and lots of people to blame. And if we accept that under Postecoglou things moved far quicker, players were brought in early, as I say, the Japanese players were brought in before the transfer window actually had opened. So Maeda and Hatate were in training with Celtic for a few days before the 1st of January. Alistair Johnson came to Celtic after Boxing Day, and he'd been in the Celtic trainings set up for about 7-10 days. Signed for the club on the day of the transfer window opening. Then on the 4th of January, played against Rangers in the first Rangers game of that year. So if we could get things done really quickly with Postecoglou being the spearhead, maybe Rodgers is slowing things down. Maybe the introduction of Paul Tisdale is creating an extra step that wasn't there before. In that that Postecoglou didn't have another person who scouted everybody who'd already been scouted. So maybe we've got one step too many in terms of our scouting department, in that Paul Tisdale seems to be the final arbiter. Yes, it's one of the things that has really surprised me, is the fact that Rodgers has come out of this to an extent. Although I think it's actually going to, it could well quickly go off if Celtic's performances on the pitch don't start improving, and Celtic don't start playing better, attacking, more constructive, more creative football. I think the fans' patience with him, but certainly in the first couple of weeks after the transfer window shut, Brendan Rodgers got the sympathy and the support of all the players, and all the vehemence and all the aggression and all the nastiness then fell upon the board. That's partly because Brendan Rodgers was the only one that was actually talking in public. Callum McGregor to a lesser extent, but I think if Mackay and Nicholson had a spokesperson or spoke for themselves in public and in the press and on TV and in press conferences, or they had a press conference person to do it, I think they could have got their message out far better. And I think that's of all the things that came out of the Monday meeting, I think that would be one thing Celtic could really, really do, is actually get a proper press relations team, a proper spokesperson to speak up on behalf of Michael Nicholson and Mackay as well, and actually explain within the confines of all the legalities and business practices. It was quite significant that at the meeting on Monday, one of Celtic's lawyers was there as part of the team. And I suspect that's because also to probably give Mackay and Nicholson a wee bit of guidance as to what they can and cannot say in terms of financial fair play rules and regulations, and stock exchange rules and regulations, and all these sorts of things. But as Pat's saying there as well, I think unless Celtic do start improving some of the goodwill that the fans have shown Brendan Rodgers will start to go. For me, he takes a large part of. I think he takes a large part of the blame for Celtic not starting this season as well as they should have done. I personally feel that the pre-season training could have started much earlier, been much more effective. I think we were slow getting the team going, slow getting the team playing as a team. Didn't feel as if Rodgers had the team firing on all cylinders for the St Mirren match. Didn't even feel like they were firing on all cylinders for the Kera Almaty match. Felt to me that Celtic were 2 or 3 weeks behind the whole of the pre-season. Well, whether that's because of whether that's because we gave certain players too long a summer holiday. Certainly, with the way that international football is these days, players don't get terribly much of a break between the end of one season and the start of another. That's going to be even worse this summer, assuming that we qualify for the Champions League. Thank you very much, Monty. That's very, very kind of you to say. No, I really enjoy doing this this channel. It's not a terribly successful channel. We've got a very loyal band of viewers and subscribers and contributors and people who add to the comment section, which is really good fun. I really enjoy the camaraderie, enjoy the banter, enjoy the sharing of opinions. I enjoy the fact that 99% of the comments and the banter and the opinions I get are all very pleasant, respectful, and so on. So, thank you very much for all that positivity. It really cheers me up when people are positive about things. My personal feeling is Sinisalo should be the goalkeeper for the next match against Dundee. And he remains being the Celtic goalkeeper for as long as he keeps on doing well. And I think that should have been the case at the end of last season. Kasper Schmeichel obviously injured his shoulder playing for Denmark against Portugal. Rodgers seemed massively keen to rush Schmeichel back quicker than probably he should have been. I'm not convinced that Schmeichel was 100% fit when he played at the end of the season and played in the cup final. I think Celtic would have been much better to have kept Sinisalo as the number one goalkeeper at the end of last season. And then I think you could have had a battle between Schmeichel and Sinisalo through the pre-season to decide who was going to be the number one goalkeeper for this season. However, as in many things, Brendan Rodgers is stubborn, pig-headed, set in his ways, and decides, no matter what the evidence, that his number one goalkeeper is Schmeichel and that he's not going to drop Schmeichel, no matter how poorly Schmeichel plays, how many mistakes he makes. Now, the couple of bad games that Schmeichel's had so far this season might just be a blip. He doesn't seem to be playing as well as he has done, did do last season. He obviously had a brilliant career playing for Leicester, had a decent career playing across in Belgium for a season or two. And at 38, a lot of goalkeepers keep on playing at high level. Craig Gordon obviously still playing for Hearts, playing for Scotland. He's now 43. I think it certainly was significant that Joe Hart retired around about the same age as Kasper Schmeichel is now. And as I said, I wouldn't be too surprised, assuming that Denmark qualify for the World Cup, that Schmeichel announces at the end of this season, after the World Cup, that he's going to retire from football. quite a lot of people have remarked upon the fact that Kasper Schmeichel looks bigger or fatter than he did before. I'm, I'm personally not convinced that he is, but plenty of people have said he's not he's bigger, fatter than he was before. I'm personally not convinced of that, but it may be the case. Not convinced that was a factor as to why he let that goal in against Braga. There's something seemed to be off. He didn't play brilliantly against Red Star Belgrade. He had a couple of errors in the Red Star Belgrade match. A couple of his passes out of defence were really terrible. That was obviously he did that multiple times against Braga. His passing out of defence was very, very poor. Yes, Clashman Numpty make a brilliant point. I'm not quite sure what Yamada and Inamura can do. Obviously, there's no reserve team football. We don't seem to play any sort of behind closed door friendly games with other teams, which means if you're not in the first team squad, which Simpson, Puzzi, Osmond, Inamura, Yamada, none of them are in the first team squad. None of them are in the 11 plus the subs for any of the games. I'm not sure what they're going to do, and it seems very, very quickly Rodgers is, despite the fact that Yamada. Not saying Yamada played brilliantly, but Yamada played pretty decently in the pre-season games. He played pretty decently coming off the bench in the league. Played, I thought, pretty well against Livingston. Could well have scored a goal. He actually scored a goal against Livingston, but he got disallowed. He had a couple of near misses against Livingston, but he seems to have been completely put on the scrap heap. Much the same as Gustav Lagerbielke, much the same as Mike Nawrocki, much the same as Kwon. Tomoki Iwata never got a chance at Celtic. Then, with some injuries, he got a goal. Soon as McGregor got himself back fit, Iwata was back as a sub or not even playing, and then out the club the following summer. So he very much seems to be a manager who likes people or doesn't like people, doesn't change his mind about them, never gives people a second chance. But the only person he seems to have given a second chance to is Liam Scales. See, he was all for selling Liam Scales to Aberdeen for £500,000 when he came in. Then Welsh and Carter Vickers and Nawrocki all got injured, all within about a week to 10 days, and suddenly we had Scales and Lagerbielke as our two centre-back options, and he's certainly played. Scales has played decently since that time. He's had some good games. He's had some poor games, but Scales very much is the man in possession of the left centre-back role. Rodgers also says that the left centre-back has to be left-footed. Not convinced that the centre-back needs to be left-footed if he's playing on the left. We had a really good partnership with Carl Starfelt playing on that side. Starfelt wasn't left-footed. So I'm not convinced that you need to be a left-foot natural player to play left centre-back. It probably is an advantage, but I think someone being a good marker, having pace, having anticipation, and in terms of the way that Celtic play, someone who's able to pass the ball, is probably far more important, which is why I would be quite keen to give Dane Murray a chance as well at the first team level. It's an interesting thing. I don't know him much from before he came to Motherwell. He does seem to be a man who can set up a team. He does seem to have a fairly attacking way of playing football. I thought the organised themselves very well on Sunday against Celtic. They defended well. They controlled midfield for many parts of the game. They obviously like playing out from the back. Playing out from the back, which obviously would fit in with the way that Celtic like to play, be it under Postecoglou, be it under Rodgers. We like playing out from the back. So in some ways, I think his style of football and his way of playing football would fit in with Celtic. I suspect that the fans would like a much bigger name. So I think they'd either like a bigger name coming from European football or English football, or failing that, a player who's an ex-Celtic great. So Scott Brown. Some people have put forward Robbie Keane, who played for us for 4 or 5 months, as one option, another option to be the manager. That would have been an interesting one. There aren't terribly many other up and coming. I think Celtic also need an up and coming manager with a lot of good ideas. I think part of the problem of Rodgers coming back to Celtic was he didn't really bring any good ideas with him. He's brought back the same theory as he's used at every club he's ever managed. He got Celtic playing in a more negative way, having been a team Celtic under Postecoglou was a very forward-thinking team. Yes. I don't know the personality of him, but he does seem he's got a lot of the good things that Postecoglou had about him. As I said, when we signed Ange Postecoglou, straight after Eddie Howe turning us down, I have to admit that I had vaguely heard of Ange Postecoglou in terms of his time as the Australian manager at the World Cup and so on. I had a vague memory of him doing well in Japanese football, but I was surprised that when Celtic signed him to be the manager, and certainly I think 95% of the football journalists and pundits and radio stations and TV stations and stuff said that he was rubbish. A lot of people said that Postecoglou would be out by Christmas. And quite a lot of the ones who wrote for the Daily Record and Radio Clyde and Sky Sports and stuff said he'd be out. Chris Boyd said he'd be out by Christmas. Another example of the wonderful football journalism skills at the Sun. Chris Boyd. And so I think a lot of people were very skeptical about Postecoglou, and he turned in for his 2 seasons to be a brilliant manager for Celtic. So I would love I'd love a manager like Postecoglou with different ideas but attacking ideas. I think with Rodgers we've gone back a couple of years. We've gone back to the times of Rodgers and Lennon, which were Celtic were successful clubs under those 2 managers, but the quality of football for much of that time wasn't as exciting as it should have been, and not nearly as exciting as it was with Postecoglou. Yes. I would like Celtic to do something different. It just feels like Celtic at the moment are never doing anything different. We play a 4-3-3, as someone Monty was saying a wee bit earlier on. Why don't we go for 3 at the back? Why don't we have 2 centre backs with another centre back playing as a more of an advanced role, playing more of a defensive midfielder role? You could certainly use, if you wanted, someone like Alistair Johnston as that sort of free roles central defender that moves into midfield role. I think Austin Trusty probably is a defender who's good enough as a passer to be that person that steps forward into midfield. Hayato Inamura is very much a player who has really good passing skills. His defensive skills are maybe not as good as they they need to be at this time. But his passing, I thought, was really good. His ability to get forward from the left back position was very good. He has rapidly improved in terms of 2 half seasons in Japan. I thought he actually adapted to Scottish football remarkably well. I thought he played really well against Livingston. Admittedly, he didn't have to do an awful lot of defending against Livingston. But then in many games in Scotland, our defenders don't have to do an awful lot of defending. So the centre backs need to do a lot of passing, and the full backs need to do a lot of midfield and final third work. Yes. I think quite a lot of people went to the meeting with maybe a hope that things would be resolved. I think the positive thing that might come out of it, and it depends on whether these fan groups are willing to keep on going and keep on negotiating and keep on having respectful dialogue and discussions. One of the things that did disappoint me was there appeared to be an agreement after the meeting that the minutes of the meeting would be agreed and then released. Now, they were released today, but on the Monday evening and the Tuesday morning, people were all over the Celtic social media sites, talking to the newspapers, talking to the radio, talking to various different people, talking about what had been said at the meeting before, the night before, which sounds like there was an agreement that there would be joint minutes, they would then be released, and then the discussions and the spreading it in the press and stuff would then take from there. And there does appear to have been a bit of a disagreement between some of the people who were at the meeting and some of the other people who were at the meeting, in that the other people had kind of gone back on the agreement that they and the board had come to regarding releasing what had been discussed and not discussed at the meeting. So, but I think I have to agree. I don't think the meeting has done anything. I don't think it's answered anybody's questions, because I think some of the questions couldn't be answered because confidentiality is one thing, legal things is another thing. Good night to you as well. Thank you for all your contributions, Monty, this evening. It's been entertaining and instructive. But again, I'm not convinced that things are going to improve. I think it's going to take a bit of compromising and a bit of people agreeing to disagree, which I'm a great believer in, agreeing to disagree and allowing other people to have their opinions, allowing people to have their thoughts, and coming to an accommodation and all moving forward in the same direction. I think at the moment things are not moving forward in the right direction. Celtic are going backwards in many ways. We're certainly not going forwards, and that's replicated on the pitch, where Celtic, I think, are tactically and performance-wise are going back and back and back. There were some, I thought there were some shoots of recovery, some good signs coming out of the Motherwell game. Maeda might be coming back into some good form. I thought also that Negrin's performance was good coming on as a sub. And I thought the fact that when we did get that late goal, that we then for the last 10-15 minutes looked like the only team who was going to win the game was Celtic. So I did like the fact that, goodbye to you as well, Gary and Cheryl Simpson. So I did like the fact that Celtic in that last 10-15 minutes seemed to be the team that was going to win it. Well, that's one opinion, and that's an opinion that an awful lot of the people who are protesting against the board are saying, and it certainly is the majority opinion. It's not my opinion. I think in any organisation, people do their job well and don't do their job well. I think a lot of people who are not part of the organisation don't understand exactly what the job entails. I don't think everybody knows all the restrictions and laws and rules and regulations that the CFO and the CEO have to operate under. Yes, I have a vague understanding of what the CEO and the CFO's job is. I don't think we as fans actually understand how complicated and complex it is now running a big global football club. They were mentioning the fact that that one of the things they were mentioning was the fact that the change in all the employment law and transfers, etc., with Brexit has had a massive impact on the club and on all clubs in Britain, but it's had an impact on Celtic. That there are some complexities regarding finances with, I think it was Germany and Belgium or something, that trading with those countries in terms of transfers to those countries and from those countries is a lot more complex now than it was before. I think there's an awful lot of complexities that we are not aware of. Now, there is a strong argument to say that we should be made much more aware of these things, that maybe someone like Michael Nicholson or Mackay, the CFO, or a spokesman for them could actually explain, because of Brexit, these are the areas where it's much more difficult for Celtic to recruit players to the country, to sell players out the country, to retain players from the academy, not moving to England. There's apparently quite a lot of complexities, and I say there's something to do with Germany and Belgium's a lot more difficult to deal with now than it was 2 or 3 years ago. Whether that was a factor with the Mikel Onge-Balikwisha deal, I don't know. That deal certainly seemed to take a lot longer to go through than it probably should have done. If you believe one set of stories, Celtic put in a very good offer for Sebastian Chinecki. His club, Hammarby, said, we're not selling him, we're not selling him, we're not selling him. And then right at the very end of the transfer window, it appears that Chinecki went to Hammarby and said, I want to leave the club. I don't want to stay any longer. And Hammarby let him go in the last 48 hours. Well, it's a very good point as to what is Celtic's full potential, given the fact that we play in Scotland. Can we know? Does anybody actually think we can challenge to win the Champions League? It's incredibly difficult, as I showed in the stats a couple of weeks ago, for anybody who's not in a big league to get into the last 16. Some teams, Bruges, have done it a bit now and again. Copenhagen have done it now and again, but it's incredibly difficult if you're not a Big Five league to get into the last 16. It's 21 years since a team who's not been in the Big Five has won the Champions League. So it's incredibly difficult for anybody, and the gap between Scotland and the Big Five leagues is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Yes. So Champions League qualification probably is, given the fact that where Scotland's coefficient as a country is, qualifying for the Champions League into the group stage, that's what Celtic's number one goal should be. And from what people are saying, that's what the goal was for this season, was to get into the Champions League. Now, we didn't do that. I completely agree. But to blame the board for McGregor, Hatate, Maeda not performing, to blame the board for Maeda not scoring that goal in added time at Celtic Park. To blame the board for Maeda not scoring the goal in the 85th minute is not. How can Michael Nicholson be to blame for Dyson Maeda missing 2 goals, which he should have put away any day of the week? What also you could say, blaming the board for our wide players, McGregor, Hatate, Engels, McCowan, Paulo Bernardo, not creating chances for Dyson Maeda if he's playing through the centre, or Adam Eade if he's playing through the middle. You can't blame Nicholson and Mackay and Lawwell for the players not playing well, for Rodgers not setting the team up properly, for not getting them motivated. My feeling also is that Rodgers didn't bother his backside to prepare tactics of how to beat Kairat Almaty. Kairat Almaty basically came through as the lower seed in the final qualifying round against us. They came through as the lower seed in the preceding one against Slovan Bratislava, and they came through as the lower seed in the one before that as well, playing much the same in all those 6 matches, mopping up the pressure, killing the game, hitting on the break. It wasn't a mystery as to how Kairat Almaty were going to play, because that's the way they played in all their Champions League qualifiers up to that point. But it didn't feel as if Brendan Rodgers actually knew how Kairat Almaty played. He knew one player basically, which was the 17-year-old who's going to be playing for Chelsea next season. That's the only player it appeared that he actually had heard of. And that, for me, is actually criminal. So that implies either Rodgers or his backroom staff are not doing their scouting of their opposition, the opposition research type of thing. Because certainly Celtic didn't have any tactics to beat Kairat Almaty at home or away. They didn't change the way they set themselves up when they went to Kazakhstan. They didn't have any kind of change to the way they played at Celtic Park. Almaty didn't change the way they played because they knew how we were going to play. That, to me, is down to Rodgers. It's down to the players. It's down to the players not taking something on themselves to actually outwit and outsmart Almaty. So fine to blame the board for not doing their job in many ways, but the players and the manager really let us down. So I agree that losing to them, drawing with them 0-0 twice and going out in penalties was very poor. I would lay all the blame actually for the players not doing their job, the manager not doing his job in those 2 legs. And it struck me that the players, and mostly Rodgers, were very, very complacent and smug, and almost assumed that we were going to go through. Almaty are a well-managed team. The guys put together a team of players, many of whom actually are international players, so they are decent players, but he's got them playing as a team. Now, they've not had a great start to their Champions League campaign. They have played 2 very good teams. They've played a Tier 1 team and they've played a Tier 2 team. And so the fact that they've been beaten quite soundly twice isn't that significant. After all, we did get absolutely thumped by Dortmund last season, who were a top-tier team. So it'll be interesting to see when Kairat Almaty are playing their 2-pot 3 and their 2-pot 4 team opponents as to how they do. Yes. Well, we certainly could have done with somebody in midfield with a bit of inspiration, a bit of creativity, a bit of magic, or something. We seem to be completely without ideas. We seem to be committed to this tactic of being patient, passing sideways, backways. We didn't seem to have anybody really until Donovan came on late in the game bombing down out wide. We seemed to be keeping 3 defenders back for most of the game. Ralston and the 2 centre backs spend most of their time on the halfway line or in our half. They very rarely ever. Yes. A million. Well, again, it wasn't Michael Nicholson. It wasn't Peter Lawwell who was playing centre forward or central midfield for us that day. It was Ida and Maeda and McGregor and Hattati and Engels and so on. So it was them that didn't score goals. It was Maeda that missed a one-on-one with the goalkeeper in the first leg and a one-on-one with the goalkeeper in the second leg. Yes. Of all the players that Celtic have got at the club, I would think Engels is probably the best one for playing the McGregor role. The only reason I think it's important to dwell on is to think about the Kairat Almaty game, is to recognise that Celtic weren't, in my opinion, Celtic weren't prepared for that 2-legged tie against Kairat Almaty. They should have been scouting those teams far, far better, preparing actual tactics, how to take on Bratislava if they won, or how to take on Kairat Almaty, and to be talking to the players for the 2 weeks prior to the as those games were going on, those 2-legged qualifiers were going on. They should have been preparing the players, and I think that didn't happen clearly because Rodgers had no idea anything about Kairat Almaty, how they played, who their players were, apart from Satpayev, who's the 17-year-old going to Chelsea next season. So that's the reason I think we should talk about Kairat Almaty. But I think you're entirely right. I think it's time to move on. It's time to move forward in the season. But we need to learn lessons from that fact that we weren't prepared. I don't think we were prepared in terms of pre-season training. I don't think we were prepared tactically for the game. I don't think the players were fired up for the game. I don't think the players were fired up at the end of 90 minutes or 120 minutes or prior to the penalties. Yes. So I am very much at looking forward. Other people are keen to keep on looking back to the Kairat Almaty match. The only reason I look back to the Kairat Almaty match is for us to learn the lessons from the Kairat Almaty match and not replicate them next summer when we'll have similar sorts of games, because we're likely to be playing a Kairat Almaty style team or a team from Azerbaijan, a team from Armenia, or that kind of thing. Or we could even be playing with a team from Finland or Iceland at that kind of level as well. And a lot of these teams are their season starts way before our season. Almaty's season was about 2/3 over by the time they played us. So I think we need to be far better prepared. Yes. Yes. So I think personally that I think the for one reason or another, a lot of the new players have taken a long time to fit in with the team. Part of that is that some of them came in late in the transfer window. Part of that, I think, is that quite a lot of the players who are part of the first team squad were late coming back from their summer holidays into pre-season. We seem to have about 4 waves of players coming into the pre-season training. Players like McGregor, McCowan, and a few others were there on day one. I think actually a couple of them were in before pre-season training started. They were doing gym work and fitness work before the actual first day of training. Then another set of players came in about 10, 14 days later. Then the Japanese players came in another couple of weeks later. Carter Vickers came in late. Now, admittedly, he'd been injured and was recovering from surgery. Alistair Johnston was playing actually for Canada for the whole summer, pretty much, as well as being on honeymoon for part of that. So he was probably the one and only player who deserved a bit of a longer summer break, and that he'd been playing for Canada for about 4 weeks in the middle of summer. So for me, yes, I think part of it was our pre-season training was very bitty. It was players joining at different stages. Some players were available for the first couple of matches. Some players only came in for the Portuguese matches. Some players only came in for the end matches against Newcastle and so on. And I think that's all part of it. So I think you make a very good point there, is that it's almost as if some of the players were strangers. I don't think the established players stepped up to make it easier for Nygren and Yamada and Inamura and so on to join the team. I think what you require when you bring in new players is that the players who are already at the club step up and perform at their best, which means that a player who's taking time to get used to the club, used to the country, moving home, being away from their family, etc., they have a few weeks, a month, 2 months, whatever, to accommodate and get themselves into the team, into the club, into the country, into their new life. And that was much the case with Jota coming back from Saudi and French football, with Kuhn coming in the winter window. It took them quite a long time to get into Scottish football. I think we were very lucky that Johnson came to Scottish football and like a duck to water. The two Japanese players, Maeda and Hatate, came in to play in the winter. Matt O'Reilly took to Scottish football very quickly as well. But you do need the McGregors, the Hatates, the Engels, the McCowans, the Bernardos, the Forrests, the Yangs, etc. Maeda, Ida, all of them were supposed to have to perform at their best, and all of them didn't perform at their best. Yes. There's an argument that Scottish football could adopt the same sort of format and have a proper winter break. We did have that for a wee while. That created quite a lot of fixture congestion. I think the changes in the Europa League scheduling and the Champions League scheduling would get in the way of that. I think, however, we do need to, assuming that we win the league this year and assuming that we're in the second or the third round of qualifying rather than the fourth round of qualifying, that we should actually get the players in a lot earlier and have them 100% fit, match fit, physically and mentally for 2 weeks before the start of the season, and not having them still at the time of the Keirat Almaty match. I don't think Celtic's players were physically or mentally at their peak. And I don't even think they're at their peak now. Yes. Yes, he has actually done well moving on from those sorts of things. Celtic have had a couple of times where we've had a bit of a bonus, a bit of a boost with an international break. I think this international break certainly gives Celtic a good chance to, with the half of the squad that's still at the club, I think it does give players like McGregor, Engels, Hatate, Iheanacho, Tunieki, Balikwisha, several others, a chance to really get fully fired up and fully honed into the tactics. I think the bonus is also that quite a lot of the players who are away on an international break will be back early in the week before the Dundee match, rather than coming back in on the Thursday. So I think there's definite ways that Rodgers and Kennedy and Strachan and stuff can actually move things forward. Yes, so I'm hopeful that Rodgers does have a bit of a rethink and a reboot and a reset with the players who are still at the club, and gets the players in early who are coming back from the international break, and then really move things forward. And I think the Dundee match is a very good one to be the first game back after the break. So we've now been going for 3 hours. So I think we should probably call it a day. It's been another wonderful evening. So thank you very much for everybody who's participated, everyone who's been on the live stream from the start, from all those who've contributed throughout the live stream. Thank you for those who joined a bit later. I think the live stream is definitely something one can pop in and pop out of. Make your comments, make your opinions, have a nice chat. So I think what we'll do, we'll call it a day, call it a Friday morning at 1 o'clock in the morning. We'll be doing another live stream next Thursday. Would guess that'll be back to 9 o'clock start, but I will put out a wee advertising thing on the Wednesday and the Thursday as to what time we're definitely starting, and also what kind of things we might want to talk about. But in essence, what we talk about is entirely down to yourselves. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sligo Boy. Thank you very much, Clashman Numpty. Thanks very much for all the positivity. Thank you for everybody contributing. And we'll just say until next Thursday, goodbye and hail, hail.